Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good evening, you all. Welcome to the trade law series. In earlier series, we have covered mainly the trade in sales of goods from the WTO perspective, and now we will come to some different conceptual aspects on the trade that are debatable among the nations, and still there has no solutions being credited till yet. Now, that is mainly the area of environment law, or let us say the issues related to environment among the nations. Very often they have created a lot of bottlenecks whenever these trade discussions are going on, and so today we will combine the two different features. One is the environmental law features and other is the trade law features, and how they interface with each other when there is a objective of the WTO, and what can be the possible solutions, or how the nations can decide to find some roadmaps for finding any possible solutions. Now, first point starts with how the environment issues can be linked with the WTO, because in the earlier discussions also it has been stated that WTO does not have any specific agreement on environment or environmental law, but it does not totally ignore the environment perspective. It one way or the other try to include the environment agenda. However, this has not been taken as a mainstream agenda until now. Reason is that when the WTO was formed, at that time it was very much realized that the nations, that is developing and less developed nations, they all have different economic objectives, they all have different social perspective, their status of industrialization is at a very different level. So, no uniform standard can be set for the environment perspective, or the developed nation, they cannot set their standard from the environment perspective that can be regulatory in nature for the developing and less developed countries. But anyway, keeping in mind that we can never ignore such an important issue, environment perspective was included in the broader principle of sustainable development, so that it can cover most of the features that are discussed in the environment law or in terms of environmental issues. So, I would like to just pinpoint here how the sustainable development concept has been included, taking the text from the preamble itself, recognizing that the relations, that means the trade relations of the member states in the field of trade and economic endeavor should be conducted with a view to raising standards of living. The primary objective, as already discussed, that the WTO claims is to raise the standard of living of the people across the nations, whether they are developed, developing or less developed nations. So, that is the one of the key objective. Raising standards of living, ensuring full employment. Full employment here means that everyone should be given an opportunity to earn, whether it is not full employment does not mean that everyone will be provided job, but even if those who are not provided with the job, they will be provided with financial resources from the state, that they can have their own enterprise, or they can have their own business, whatever, their own commercial establishment, whatever can be the source of earning, and a large and steadily growing volume of real income and effective demand, and expanding the production of trade in services, goods and services. So, that is how primarily the WTO wants to shape the economic system of the member states. Now, next, while allowing for the optimal use of world's resources in accordance with the objective of sustainable development. So, the second part of the paragraph covers The optimal use of world's resources. Optimal use means in the most efficient manner the resources of the world that are in existence and are available through the natural resources, that must be used keeping in mind the intergenerational equity. Intergenerational equity means the responsibility of one generation towards the future generation. So, optimal use of the world's resources means it should not be indiscriminate use, or it should not be the use of natural resources should not be simply for the profit motive, but keeping in mind that what are the requirements of the present generation, and also there will be the requirements of the same resources that are available and that are depleting day by day for the future generations. So, there has to be some check and balances, and that check and balances are covered through the principles of sustainable development. Therefore, that it has been included in accordance with the, that is why the optimal use of world's resources is further conditioned with, in accordance with the objective of sustainable development, seeking both to protect and preserve the environment and to enhance means for doing so. So, now why sustainable development is important here? Because somewhere the WTO, the founding members of the WTO realized that we need to accept that there is a requirement for preserving the environment and to enhance the means for doing so in a manner consistent with their respective needs and concern and different level of economic development. But along with that, they have also added that the member states, they can use the resources, they can go for the development agenda because they are all at the different level of economic development. Therefore, there cannot be any uniform principle applicable to all the member states for making the similar environmental standards or putting some strict laws with regard to the environmental standard. But this does not mean it has completely ignored. It has, as a matter of fact, realized that there is something of termed as environment which has to be taken together with the trade objectives. But of course, we keep in mind that there are economic objectives of different nation, and that can be covered through the flexible approach of the member states. Now, how we discuss this? Basically, the free trade is the key principle adopted by the WTO, that means liberalization of the trade. Now, while advocating the concept of liberalization of the trade, nowhere it has been suggested that such liberalization should be in parity with the sustainable development. But anyway, after realizing that what will be the negative consequences of uncontrolled free trade or unchecked free trade, the free trade has been further subject to regulation, or it has been made subject to regulation with sustainable development goals. So, free trade with the values of sustainable development to go alongside, this cannot be denied. Several agreements related to trade, but no specific agreement to protect the environment, as stated to you now, that there are several agreements concerning the trade in goods, trade in services, intellectual property rights in the WTO trading system, but there is no specific agreement concerning the environment. Anyway, one also has to see a very broader perspective, that is the international law perspective. There are various conventions signed that are concerning the environment, and those conventions, they are trying to force the countries that they should abide by the environment norms or environment standards. Now, if those environment standards or environment norms are, even if not included directly in the WTO, but interpreted in terms of the preamble of the WTO, the objectives that are set in the WTO, that itself will create the scope for the fulfillment of those objectives or the objectives of those conventions through the WTO trading system. I mean to say that international conventions are part of the international law, WTO is part of the international law. International conventions on environment issues or environmental law, they have a broader agenda, how to have a uniformity in terms of environmental standards, environmental goals, environmental objectives. WTO is mainly seen a specific institution promoting liberalization of trade. But for fulfilling those agendas as set by the international environment conventions, the WTO objectives that can be set as a road or pathway for fulfilling the objectives. How that can be done? By making the interpretation of the WTO objectives, by making the interpretation of the WTO provisions, like as mentioned in the preamble itself, that they are in alliance with the broader objective of international law and international conventions that promotes the environmental standards, environmental agendas and the environmental issues, because they are to be acceptable to all, they are like necessary for all, and those challenges are common for the entire humanity. While there is no specific agreement dealing with environment under WTO rules, members can adopt trade related measures aimed at protecting the environment, provided a number of conditions to avoid the misuse of such measures for protectionist ends are fulfilled. Now, there are two things, there are two ways on the same path. On one side, the WTO feels that putting restrictions in the name of environment can be considered as protectionist methods or the protectionist approaches by the member states. On the other hand, the member states, many of the member states, they feel that by connecting trade issues and the environment issues, there can be some quality improvement in the production sector also, because if there is a restrictions on the movement of goods, or there is a restrictions of movement of any such commercial items that has not been manufactured keeping in mind the required environmental standards, that itself will put pressure on that manufacturing unit, that industry, or even that member states, that they should abide by the environment regulations. So, in that respect, we can think that the WTO will play a positive role, but then we cannot ignore that the member states, they can also misuse the leverage being given to them for putting restrictions on environmental clauses as a protectionist measure. They can intentionally put restrictions on the trade, stating that these restrictions are imposed because the goods are not manufactured keeping in mind the environment standard, but as a matter of fact, that could be simply to put restrictions or to curb the competition that their own product is facing from the foreign product. So, that will lead to the protectionist measure. So, that is one such challenge the WTO faces. How far the states, member states, they are in true sense willing to abide by, or they are in true sense willing to enforce the environment regulations, not simply trying to be the protectionist. What adds to the biased position are the competing interests of the member states in practice. We cannot ignore that member states, talking about the free trade or in the context of or in relation of the free trade, member states, their market system feels very competitive, and they realize that they have to work to meet those competitive interests. So, therefore, environment issues or environment values automatically comes to the backside. It is not at the forefront of those or in the market system or among the nations. So, that has led to the biased position. Even the states, or the I mean to say the government of the states, they want to get more and more of earnings, or let us say benefits through the international trade, rather than realizing that the environment is sacrificed, or what will be the long term effect because of compromising with the environment values. The contradiction in practice is deepened whenever the multinationals have to make a choice between trade and environment standard. Now, this is not only confined to a domestic production of the goods or domestically produced goods facing competition with the foreign products. I mean to say, let us say there is a country A, which is let us say maintaining environment standards, and it is producing a kind of let us say cars or any product out of the iron and steel. And now, the same country A is also facing the same kind of product from outside, and the product, similar product from outside, that is manufactured without abiding by the environment regulation, therefore it's a cheaper product. So you can realize how there is a difference in the price value because of one country, that is country A, is providing all kind of environmental regulations. It is trying to maintain the environment standards, whereas the country B, which is an exporting country of the same product into the country A, is selling the products without abiding the environment regulation, therefore its product is cheaper. So there is one such competition that most of the nations are quite cynical about it. Now second is, and this leads to the biased position among the member states. Second is the contradiction in practice is deepened whenever the multinationals have to make a choice between trade and environment. Now the second problem is where the multinational companies, they have their production unit in the many places of the world, they have chosen to shift their production units to the countries where they find the factors of production at a cheaper rate. That factor of production can be the labor or the material they are getting, or sometime even they find that in those countries there are quite flexible environmental regulations, so they can easily do the production at a cheaper price without abiding by the environment values. So therefore in that reference they find that it will be beneficial because multinational companies are also in competition with each other. For example, a multinational company that is registered, let's say in US or in European Union, if the same multinational is manufacturing the product in its home country and trying to export it to outside world, that will be quite expensive. But if the same multinational company is although registered in US or in European Union, has production unit, let's say in some developing countries, then they may find that the production cost of the same product is cheaper. Now that production cost is cheaper because of the various factors, and out of various factors, one such is that they don't have to meet the environmental norms, or they don't have to meet the environmental regulation, or to pay the environment duties. So that is one such problem being faced when we talk about the WTO as a system trying to promote the free trade system. Legislative and judicial bodies follow an unbalanced approach. Now it's very important that the lawmaking bodies and the judicial bodies, how they approach to these objectives or to these challenges. Now in many countries it has been seen that the lawmaking bodies, or let's say the judicial bodies, they are not very active when it comes to protecting the environment, and there they often go in favor of the trade side whenever there is a dispute or a choice has to be made to either go for the trade benefits or to make the environment better or more healthier. So many a times they are realizing that their people will get more employment, they will have more better earnings, foreign exchange earning. They try to side for the trade issues, or let's say the trade objectives, rather than going for the environment objectives, and that has created, let's say, lot of complexities at the grassroots level. And not only it's the problem at the grassroots level, but the wrong kind of message is being sent to the people in general. And for this is one of the reasons why environment law or environmental norms are considered as soft law norms or soft law, because when it comes to its effectiveness, when it comes to its enforcement, there the judicial body and the lawmaking bodies in many countries, they take the back foot. The issue of free trade and environmental sustainability also touches on the institutional character of the WTO. Now it's not simply nation between nation or question of developed country and the developing country, but it questions how far the WTO has been doing justice, or in the absence of any mainframe agreement that could have put check on the WTO's free trade system, that has weakened the environment objectives. But we can have a second interpretation of this also, because inclusion of sustainable development or inclusion of sustainability in the preamble of the WTO itself shows that somewhere in the WTO system it has an underlying concept of fair trade, although primarily it goes for the free trade system, but somewhere as a regulatory measure the WTO system wants to implement or use the fair trade concept, and sustainable goals or environment related goals can be interpreted and can seek the support of the fair trade goals also, and that will strengthen the position of the WTO in a very comprehensive manner. It will be very clear to the people in general, not simply among the developed nation, that the WTO, being a comprehensive body that covers not simply the core trade issues, but also the issues that are very much related to the trade, and there are many issues that are affected because of the free trade. So it will be like a strong institution trying to balance between trade and environment, which at present seems to be lacking. How far WTO is capable of fulfilling a proper institutional role by promoting sustainable development goal along with the free trade? This remains to be checked, but one cannot deny here the role played by the dispute settlement body, that is the judicial body of the WTO. Many a times it has taken such stand, or while making the decision it has tried to put certain regulatory checks, or it has tried to show that the necessity for environment or environment issues cannot be ignored by the member states. Although many a times the less developed nations or the developing nations, they have asked for the further concessions, despite that a minimum level of standard has been strictly suggested and also made in their judgments by the dispute settlement body. Business attempts to gain benefit through relaxation on trade rules. It is always that the attempts made by the business interest people or the trade interest people, that they have advocated for further relaxation of the rules, and it is not simply the business interest, but also the group of developing nations and the less developed countries. They argue that for them it is a big challenge how to give environment a priority, because they have the issues related like unemployment, issues like infrastructure development, other challenges like more and more industrialization for meeting the demands of the people, meeting the demands of the market. So therefore, for them the WTO cannot set strict standards for the environment rules or environment regulations. Comparison need to be drawn between the objectives of free trade, protectionist measure and maintaining environmental standards. A thorough comparison has to be made. What are the objectives of the free trade, and in what reference the protectionist measure should not be applied when we talk about the environment related goals. So there has to be a fair amount of judgment, or let us say the fair opportunity being given. If there is a restrictions imposed based on environmental standards, that should be acceptable to the states, whereas the protectionist measure, if protectionist measure is adopted by a member state which is like circumventing the environment rules, that should definitely be discarded, or the dispute settlement body of the WTO should take strict measures. Lack of compatibility between the policies of trade liberalization and principle of sustainable development while de-escalating the protectionist trade policy. Now what we feel today, or the kind of challenges that we see today, one of the reason is that there is no such harmony between the trade liberalization goals and the sustainable development goals. Trade liberalization goals, they talk about the profit, the competition in the market, efficient use of the resources, but nowhere it touches about the environment and the related values. Whereas the sustainable development goal, it sets primarily how far the environment can be protected, what can be the measure adopted to improve the environment condition. So there is many a times it seems that they both the objectives are in two different directions, and a harmonious construction has to be made, that at times we need to give priority to the agendas that are from sustainable development goals, at times and for some nations we need to give certain priorities for the trade policy goals or the free trade goals. There is an inverse relation between industrialization and healthy environment. It is very common or commonly seen that wherever there is a gross industrialization or industrialization in the large scale, it has set many health related problems, or it has created health related challenges. So, we cannot deny that most of the health challenges that we see today, somewhere the root cause lies in the misuse, or let us say the exploitation of the resources of the environment, on firstly for the exploitation of the resources that are in the environment. Secondly, we have not been able to maintain a balance between the use of the resources that are available in the environment and the healthy conditions for our living. Thirdly, we can say that there also exists in the nature its potential to rejuvenate, or its potential to recreate itself, or its potential to purify itself. So, I can say that it is not the question that we should not use the natural resources, but firstly we must realize that the within the nature itself there is a potential to purify itself after its use. For example, if someone has, let us say, disposed of the waste in the river, and that is, let us say, one person. So, within the potential of the nature, that will get away, or let us say the water will get purified automatically after a certain days, because within the nature it has the potential to purify itself. But let us say after a certain period of time, many people are throwing the garbage or waste in that river water. So, after a time we will realize that there is no such purification in the water automatically, which earlier used to happen. Why it is so? Because the potential of the nature to purify itself or rejuvenate itself, that has broken, or that threshold level has been breached. So, we need to understand the concept of sustainability allows us to use whatever are the resources, allows us to, let us say, even set the emissions, but then that has to be at a very regulatory level, only to the extent that can be again controlled by, or let us say purified by the environment itself. So, that kind of balance is very essential when we talk about the free trade goals and also the sustainable development goals. And if we fail to maintain the balance, there we always find there is an inverse relation between the industrialization and the healthy environment. Earlier, the impact of pollution on the environment remained within the limits of natural assimilation. That is what I was saying, that earlier also we human beings have been using resources available, or they have been even throwing the garbage or waste, but it was so that all things that were disposed of in little amount, and therefore it got naturally assimilated. Because of the free trade, there is a severe pressure on the use of natural resources. Now, since free trade has created market competition, therefore countries, they always want to have more and more natural resources to meet their level of production, to increase their level of production, without understanding that, or even if understanding, but without taking any such serious steps on how the negative consequences of those production can be checked. Adopting liberalization policies have created competition in the market. The environment has lost its potential for natural cyclical rejuvenation. The inconsistencies, what are the inconsistencies here? The import restrictive measure on account of protecting environment turns to be the protectionist supporting domestic industry. Now, if a nation puts restrictions for the reason of achieving the environment goals, or for putting check on the goods that are not manufactured in a very environment friendly manner, or the nation from where those goods are imported, they have not maintained environmental rules, and if those restrictions are put to such goods, then those nations are targeted as protectionist. Therefore, it does not serve the purpose that how the WTO will be able to resolve the crisis whenever it is related to sustainable development goals. State support to industries that do not follow environment regulation. Many a times nations, in order to promote further export or giving support for in the form of subsidies to industries that are for export purposes, they are never trying to check, or they are never trying to figure out whether those industries have fulfilled the environment obligations or not. and by these state support those industries, they have, rather than decreasing the pollution or the emission level, they have rather increased the emission level. Financial support at the cost of environmental measures. Now, in the light of this, it is proposed that we must try to understand the environment objectives through fair trade principles and the fair trade concepts. And further, in order to maintain those values or the standards, we must impose certain restrictions on the free trade, keeping in mind that they are meant for realizing the objectives of fair trade. Now, that can be restrictions based on fair trade on the grounds of environmental protection, because that if it is based on the fair trade objective, then we can't say that it is protection for protectionist purpose, or any nation is putting restrictions being a protectionist to the foreign goods. So, we go by another hypothesis that there can be restrictions imposed on fair trade objectives. Next is based on health and safety standards. So, we cannot simply say that there is a broader objective of environment protection which covers all kind of living beings and quality of the human life, but it has to be made further specific, like what are the kind of side effects or disadvantages with regard to health of the people, which is directly the consequence of unchecked emissions or unchecked industrialization. So, that can be done through the parameters that are set to know the health conditions of the people living in those places, the standard of living those people are maintaining in the cities that are closer to industrial hubs or the places where they are closer to the manufacturing units. Cross border trade between developed countries on the one side and developing and less developed countries on the other side need to be examined. On the paper, or so far as the international conventions are concerned, it seems very fine that some group of countries, they are maintaining the environment rules, they are trying to maintain the environment standards, but when it comes to cross border trade, mainly between the developed countries and the developing countries, even many developed countries, they have breached those obligations or they have not fulfilled those obligations. There are certain such examples. Key objectives of multinational to gain profit, that is one such reason. The negative impact on the environment can be measured in terms of externalities. Now, how do we measure the effect of those environment emissions, or let us say any such consequences faced because of environment degradation? That is measured in economic term externalities, that is the extent of the money, or let us say the extent of financial resources we will have to use for meeting out those effects caused due to the pollution or the emission or any such degradation caused by the environment. I mean to say, let us say if there is an industry which is emitting sulfur dioxide or any such toxic gas, and closer to that industry there are people living. So, realizing the fact that it is toxic to their health, the state has decided to purify the air by artificial measures or by man-made measures. So, that will be like they have to pay the cost for purifying the air or to remove those sulfur or sulfur particles. So, that the extent of cost they have to bear for purifying the air can be termed as the externalities here. The or other way out can be the extent of losses that are suffered because of the emissions or environment pollutions can be termed as externalities. So, the negative impact on the environment can be measured in terms of externalities. Economists suggest tax rebates or subsidies. Now, there is a suggestion that how the industries can be motivated to follow the environment rules or to follow these obligations. Now, one way can be to give them some tax concession, that those industries who are fulfilling those or they are ready to go by the environment rules or the environment norms, there should be reduction in tax, because after all that money they can use for meeting those objectives, or let us say for use of resources that can be better for putting check on the environment pollution, or that can be used for purifying the degradation that is caused on the environment. So that is one way. Second is by providing subsidies. Subsidies is like a direct support of financial nature being given. So tax is like an indirect support, that is the extent of amount that is due to the government is not taken by the government, which in general an industry is supposed to pay, but subsidy is like something, the amount that is shared by the government in support for the industries to do something to meet the environmental objectives or to change their production plan, that can be less that can have less effect on the environment, or that will have less emissions. So that is the kind of choice. Now sometime it is the tax that can be beneficial, sometime it is the subsidy that can be beneficial, because in terms of subsidy there is a kind of danger that the same amount which is given by the government for maintaining environment standards or for using equipments that are environment friendly can be used for trade purposes. That means that can be misused, the amount that is being given by the government can be misused. But for the tax it's a bit safer, because if the industry has fulfilled the promise or it has changed its mode of production, which was earlier more polluting to now less polluting, and after finding the results then the taxes are reduced, that means a kind of award being given, reward being given to such industry. So that will be more concrete. So anyway, sometime for but when is subsidy beneficial? Subsidy is beneficial when industry is new and at its very nascent stage there is a suggestion by the government that they should go for renewable sources of energy, and renewable sources of energy are expensive. So in that case the subsidy can be a better option for the government. Other physical adjustments are required. So government has to take some other measures, like providing them loans at a cheaper rate, providing them infrastructure based support for going to change their mode of production that is more environment friendly. Industries require support during formative years as stated, because during formative years they are facing market competition, and they that is the time period when they have to survive, and for survival they may not bother much about the environment rules. So therefore at that time, if there is a state support mainly for such like objectives, non profitable objectives, that is environment, that will be very beneficial for industry, and that will mainly be very supportive for the industry. Transformation of production through environmental friendly measures. Now this was what the WTO, or the picture from the WTO what we see, setting the goals, realizing that the WTO still has to do a lot when it comes to the environment agenda, and based on the WTO's initiative member states can also have their policies either through tax measures or through subsidies. But then there is other trade concept going on, that is formation of regional trade organizations. That again is pushing the trade agenda at a different level and trying to let us say put the environment issues at the back foot, or trying to deprioritize the environment issue. One such example can be quoted here, that of the NAFTA. Now NAFTA is North Atlantic Free Trade Association, where there is a mainly three countries, US, Canada and Mexico. Now US and Canada, they are quite advanced industrially and they are strong financially, but what we see that United States and Canada, they have opened their manufacturing units in Mexico, for the reason that Mexico does not have stronger environment rules and regulations. Secondly, the currency value of the Mexican money is quite less in comparison to that of the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. So the production unit from Canada and the US, they find it very cheaper and very beneficial if they move to the Mexico. One of such example is where the company named Metales y Dervados de Mexico it has abandoned at least 4,729 tons of lead and cadmium and arsenic in the soil. This is one such company that has abandoned lot of toxic material in Mexico near a river. Firstly, I would like to explain why I am quoting here the example of Mexico, because it is one such developing country, and many of the developing countries, they have now export zones or export production or export promotion zones. Now these export production and export promotion zones, they are very much tariff free, and being tariff free, the multinational companies, they are having their production units in those export areas, which is in Mexico termed as maquiladora. Maquiladora is the term used in Mexico for industries export zones or duty free zones. Now here what they find that the factors of production, they are quite cheaper. They find that they do not have to fulfill the environment obligation so strictly. If they make the same products in their home country, or if they have their production units in their home country, they will have to abide by the strict environmental rules. After shifting the production bases to developing countries, further they find that it is profitable. Why it is profitable? Because the multinationals also are in competition with each other, so they will have lesser cost of production of these products. Now another such example is that of the ship dismantling industry and the paper industry, where ship dismantling from the developed nations, the decommissioned ship from the developed nation, they are sent to the developing countries for removing the left outs or the other scrap goods that can be recycled and reused. But recycling and reusing, it's not the problem. The problem is the process used for recycling and reuse of those leftover goods. That is very health challenging, or it is quite risky for the people there, because it contains a lot of asbestos. I will come to those cases. Next is the paper industry, because paper industry requires a lot of natural pulp, and that pulp is obtained from the forest, because they have to cut a lot of trees. So many of the paper industries that are from the developed country, from Sweden, from Finland, they have moved to the places like the Amazon rainforest area, where they can find the vegetation, the trees in abundance, but as a consequence of it, that has led to the deforestation of many areas. So that is another such example. I will come to those cases one by one. Stora Enso is the case of paper industry. The case study here I have cited, that of Clemenceau, is that of the decommissioned ship being sent to India by France, and how that was challenged. Stora Enso case, this is a Swedish Finnish company. The company owns large paper pulp company. This is one of the leading paper company throughout the world, where the two companies have combined together, one from Sweden and the other from Finland. Two companies named Varasal and Arcros. Varasal is located now in South Brazil in the state of Bahia. It is a famous rainforest area. It is expected that this industry will produce the cheapest paper pulp in the world. But at what cost? Now you see that mainly the Amazon rainforest and the other vegetation of that place is getting spoiled, or it is now getting extinct. Simply it is not that the trees and the plantation that is being exploited there, but as a consequence of it, many kind of living species of birds, the animals, insects, they are getting now endangered because of the companies move to use lot of woods and the plantation from that forest area. This indeed is beneficial for the company, but the effects on ecology does have negative consequences. However, this one-sided and short-term approach, while making a choice between trade and the environment, has raised the concern of sustainable development. Now this has led to a big question mark, that why these multinational companies, they have been permitted to exploit the resources, that is the natural resources, although they might have found it at a cheaper price. Now this again questions the role of the WTO, because it's mainly the kind of format that is being let's say scripted by the WTO, that the states can have their multinationals, where production of means of production or the production units can be installed at different countries, but those countries, they are now suffering for the environmental consequences. Now those countries, like here the Brazil is one such example, they are at the crossroad what they should do. On the one side, they have to bear the problem of unemployment, they have to bear less industrialization, so they are willing that more industries should be to their places. They should also there should be more of the employment of their people, therefore that will be good if the multinationals are coming. But on the other hand, realizing that those multinationals are now using or exploiting the available resources to this extent that will create irreparable damage to the environment, it becomes very complex for them how to answer these problems or how to resolve these problems unilaterally. Therefore, this poses not simply the question to that particular member state, but it's a bigger question to the WTO, whether there is some lacuna in the free trade concept or the various trade agreements that are included in the WTO trade system, that leads to one-sided growth or that leads to one-sided dream objective, but the other values or the other, let's say, objectives that are based on sustainable principles or that are from different international conventions, they get sidelined. So now it's a question for the institution itself and the lawmaking bodies and also the government, that they need to find the legal instrument that can create the bridge between these two different set of goals, that is the trade goals and the sustainable development goals. The concern can be highlighted through following instances. The expansion of plantation for the production of paper pulp has deprived local people, peasants, indigenous groups and Afro-Brazilians of their subsistence from the land. Now, it's not simply that the plants are removed or the trees are being taken away, but the people, the indigenous people or the tribal people that are living in those forest area, they are supposed to be destabilized, and their dependency on those forests for economic reasons, that has also become challenging. Also, there is their relocation, and now they cannot survive in the forest, so they are supposed to be relocated in some different places, but it's creating one problem after the other. So why not to put check on the unregulated free trade, or why not to create some additional features to those free trade concept that can take or give due weightage to the sustainable development goals also. Now, this displacement of indigenous people wherever it happens, it is also the matter of constitutional right, because basically it's in most of the constitution that the fundamental rights are protected and fundamental right to life and living is protected. So anywhere, if because of the policies of the state someone is supposed to become homeless, or his resources of living that is being taken away from him, puts the question mark on the constitutional rights also. Plantations specifically for paper industry have also had detrimental effect on agriculture sector, because it has affected entirely the farming area. Farming area is affected because the wastewater from those industries like the paper industry, that is left to the farmlands or the flowing waters, and that flowing water, which earlier was pure, was used for agriculture purposes, is of no use now, because it is now mixed with the effluents or the remnants of the industrial waste. Additional problem has arisen, such as availability of clean water for basic necessities getting reduced. These plantations obstruct the regeneration of the Atlantic rainforest, as plantations on large scale for the paper industry has negative consequences for sensitive flora and fauna in the region. It becomes further complicated as regards maintaining a clean environment, because the pulp mill for this company is planned to be located 5 kilometers from river Jikithona. Now, you can see it's how it has affected even the river water where this pulp mill is located. Farm workers associations and environmental organizations have criticized Barcel for transforming diverse agricultural land into monocultures. Now, this has led to the critical perspective that why this paper mill industry that has created so many problems. And this again, as stated, is for the government to raise the concern in the WTO Ministerial Conference, as discussed earlier also, that the WTO has a hierarchical or a pyramidal structure where there is a ministerial conference, then the representatives to the bureaucratic staff, and then various committees. So, during the ministerial conference, which is held after every 2 years, it's important that these issues related to the environmental challenges that are being discussed and some solution to this, or at least some amicable solution for both the sides, that is devised. Concerning trade benefits and environment, a choice of values and standard. Now, it's very clear that there are two different goals. One is regarding the trade benefits, and another is regarding the values and the standard. That means how we value our environment, how we value the place where we live, and to the level of standards we want to maintain. So, the two different set of objectives or the goals has to be, let's say, it has to be evaluated at times, and the legal instruments, they need to act as a tools or act as a mechanism to maintain the balance between two different goals. Michael Porter is known for describing a competitive advantage of nations that is based on the model for understanding the competitive positions of a nation in a global market. Now, one of the author or thinker is Michael Porter. He is very enthusiastic about the environmental policies strongly adopted by the states. He is not a kind of person who believes that the states must primarily go for the trade objectives, or they should give more concern to the trade objectives and sideline the environment objectives, despite the fact that the nations, they have to face those challenges. Now, for him, the reason is that it leads to more innovation. Thinking about the environment or environment objectives, that allows us to think about, or that makes way for us to think about the cleaner technology, better finding out the better resources, trying to know the methods that can be used for improvement in the environment or environmental conditions, our sensitivity towards other living creatures and flora and fauna. So, he has a very positive approach that the states, they should create such platform and such innovative goals for more and more environment concern, and give a free thought to this. He claims that environmental regulations will encourage innovation and upgrading, and on this basis a proposition has been framed to analyze the effect on environmental standards because of the trade benefits acquired at the cost of maintaining the required standards. So, what he claims is that the environmental regulation will encourage innovation and upgrading on that basis. That means, for example, like we were facing the vehicular pollution problem in Delhi. Not only in Delhi, it's a problem everywhere in India, but one such place where it was very critical, that was Delhi. So, once the judiciary became stricter, they let's say the innovators or those environmentalists, they found an alternative to that, that is CNG. So, that is one such example. Other is like now we are moving to the electric cars. So, that is all because of the innovative thinking, realizing the fact that we are facing the environmental challenge. We have we are trying to find new path or the new technology which can be more cleaner, more sustainable. So, he claims that environmental regulations will encourage innovation and upgrading. On this basis, a proposition has been framed to analyze the effect on environmental standards because of the trade benefits acquired at the cost of maintaining the required standards. The environmentalists fear they are losing high standards because of the current institutional arrangement at the WTO in particular. But what is the situation now? That most of the environmentalists fear the WTO is more in favor of the trade objectives or the trade issues. Therefore, they think it's very difficult whether they will be able to sustain the high standards or maintain the high standards of environment. Now, for this reason, it becomes quite critical for the WTO be introspective and to rearrange whether it can continue with the present one-sided line on freedom of trade, freedom of goods, or it can create the environmental objectives alongside the free trade of goods and free trade of services. The WTO allows trading with countries maintaining low environmental standard, which in a way is a challenge to environmental objectives. Now, how the question arises, how the WTO is allowing. Earlier also it has been stated that one such reason is that the role of multinational. Second reason is the developing nations, they have different environment standards in comparison to that of the developed nation, and there is a free flow of trade between the developed countries and the developing countries. Therefore, it automatically leads to this problem that there cannot be a uniform set of standards when it comes to the environment, and many of the nations, they are maintaining low standards of environment. Environmental sanctions or restrictions in trade for meeting sustainable development objectives create scope of law for the protection of environment. So, what can be done? The wider scope of law is required, that it can include or it can be inclusive of the environment sustainable development goals whenever the goods are traded, whenever there is a import and export. So, that is one such method, that widening the scope of the law for the protection of environment. It is for the reason of the tension between trade interest and the required proportionate effectiveness of environmental interest, which finally leads to the discussion on sustainable development. Now, if we go to the background why the concept of sustainable development was introduced during the Rio conference, that is mainly because the leaders realized, or the representative of the state realized, that we cannot say that we will not exploit the resources of the environment, or we can live with the purest form of environment without using the resources. So, using the resources of environment or going for industrialization, there is no choice, all right. So, we have to follow those, but to what extent, that is another question. So, therefore, to what extent means here the right kind of balance that has to be inculcated whenever there is a trade objective or the environment objectives. That was why the sustainable development goal or the sustainable development concept was introduced. Now, similar broad area has to be introduced in terms of agreement in the WTO system that can create the possibility of a balance between the trade interest and the environment interest. Thank you.